Hey everyone, it's Austin Carroll with the Blue Key Real Estate Team. I'm an investor in Baltimore City. I own over 60 units. I also own a real estate sales team and am a realtor. And today we're gonna be walking through one of my clients' projects. We just got it under contract. So we're gonna walk through, talk a little bit about what's going on with this house. But one of the biggest things about this house is it's in an area with a lot of vacants. So if you're familiar with Baltimore City, we're in the Johnston Square neighborhood. And the interesting thing about where we're at right now is that these houses were built in the 80s compared with ones right across the street that were built in the 1900s, literally the first decade of the 1900s. So you're gonna see when we go out front, you're gonna see kind of the differences between this side of the block and that side of the block. And it's really interesting because one of the biggest things is that block has a bunch of vacants. And so as you start looking at it, you might say, hey, this isn't a great investment area, but then you go to that block and look back at this block and you say, wow, this block is really, really nice. So even if we look around right now in the backyard of this one, it was built without an alley. So there's actually just yard back here and there's a little garden and things like that. With it being built in the 80s, the other thing is this is really just a cosmetic renovation. This is gonna be a rental for my client, but it could also be a flip. And we're gonna walk through and show you a little bit about why. So we're in the back right now because there's some road construction going out front. So it's a little bit noisy, but we'll get there, I promise. So as we look here, you'll notice we got some hardwood floors. And really one of the big things is that this house is really well designed. One of the things that we talk about in our other videos is how houses and specifically row homes were designed in the early 1900s really doesn't work really well for us these days. Now this is a nice wide design. You've kind of got the kitchen tucked away here. It's really just a nicely designed property. So as we start talking about some of the things that my client's gonna do, he's gonna keep these hardwood floors. They're wonderful. He's gonna replace some of these vinyl floors, this is the older sheet vinyl. He'll get some of the new wood look stuff that looks really nice. In here, these cabinets are actually in good shape. So he's gonna paint these a dark gray, a lighter dark gray. Put some cabinet pulls on here. Here's a pro tip is if you just put a nice big looking cabinet pull on here, maybe something about that big that looks really nice, it changes the whole look of your kitchen. One other thing that I always like to recommend to clients is replace this Formica countertop with granite. So as you can see kind of right here, you can see the edge of this Formica right here. It just ends up getting torn up. Somebody comes around the corner, they knock into it with stuff, it starts chipping up, and you're gonna have to replace this every 5-10 years. But if you go ahead and put granite in, which these days really isn't that much more expensive, then that's gonna be really durable and it's gonna look really nice, and it's an upsell of something that you can say. So that's the kitchen area here. You've got a lot of light. This is something that you don't see in stuff that was built in the early 1900s. You've got a huge window right here that lets a lot of light in, and that's a huge bonus for people, especially when you're in a row home where you don't have windows on the side, but you've got lots of light coming in as you're cooking and things like that. So that's the kitchen. Now let's head over to the basement. I always like to go to the basement first to check out some of the systems, make sure there's no water problems or anything like that. It might just be worth it not to even walk in the basement. So it's a little bit dark down here. I'm gonna put a light on. But what you're gonna see with this basement is that it's really tall and open. So this right here is probably about 9-foot ceilings. You can also see where the supporting wall is right here. So this is the big support right here. And it's a big, nice metal steel beam that goes across the middle here. So I am probably never gonna have any structural problems here. You can just see this is just a nice beefy beam that's going on here. And I can kind of tell there's nothing really going on up there. I like it when it's open like this. I can really see everything. Where one of the other big differences between some of these older homes that we look at and the things that were built in the 80s or really the 70s and older or newer is this is PVC. So typically you might have cast iron here that's really hard to work with. Over the years it gets brittle, things like that. But this is really kind of the gold standard of what everybody uses nowadays. Now the other thing that we're looking at is the electric panel right here. Now this one's interesting because it's something called a Federal Pacific. Federal Pacific was a brand that had a lot of recalls and things like that. So it actually is kind of a fire hazard to have this panel. So my investor is going to replace just the panel itself. Now, if we look up top, we can see that we've got the rubber insulated electrical wires versus the really old stuff, which is the cloth insulated, which is a huge fire hazard. So basically what we can see here is all of this electrical is in good shape. It doesn't really need anything done to it. So other than replacing the panel, that's really the only thing that we're gonna do in here. So we've talked about the plumbing system, we've talked about the electrical system. Now we wanna take a look at that HVAC. So if I take a look at the HVAC system, which is your heating and cooling, I can tell a couple things on this. One, there's no gas in this house, which is a little bit unique for Baltimore. But seeing as how it was built new, it probably didn't make sense for them to bring gas into the property. So this is actually a heat pump. You can see the big wire coming here. In other properties, if you look at some of our videos, you'll see a gas line that comes down and hooks into the unit. So that's going to be the first thing that we're looking at there is what kind of heat is it. So this one's electric heat. And down here, I don't actually have a date on this one, but what I do have is I have the first two numbers of the serial number right there, which is 16. That tells me that this is a 2016. So we're in 2020 right now, a 4-year-old system. These things last 20 to 30 years. The outside unit is also that same age. So this is actually in really good shape. We're not gonna have to do anything to the HVAC system, which is really exciting as we start looking at our costs. So down here, he's really just gonna finish this space, put down some vinyl flooring versus the carpet that's currently there, and it's just gonna be more usable space for my client. So this is the back room in the basement, and this has an interesting opportunity here that he's gonna kind of feel out and see if he wants to do. But we were in the back when we started this video, so you can see the backyard is really open. And this is just kind of a, kind of a dungeon room right here. There's no windows, it's not light, it's not finished. But what can happen here is he can actually go outside, dig down, and build a window in here with a window well, which would make this into a legal bedroom. It's actually a pretty good size. So that's something that he's gonna feel out if he wants to do. We're gonna look at the comparison property, see if anybody's done that, see if it gets him any value, and we'll get a contractor estimate for adding that window in here. But it's just something else to kind of think about when you're walking through properties is what could add value here, and then you can start to analyze, would that actually make sense or does it not? So one of the interesting things about this house that we noticed immediately right as we went upstairs, which you'll notice as well, is that this property is actually a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, and it was only listed as a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. So we thought it was a pretty good deal as a 2-bedroom, enough to go check it out. All of a sudden we get here and it's a 3-bedroom, to our delight, that really changed the comparison property. So we could start pulling 3-bedroom comps versus a 2-bedroom comp, which is a comparison property. So you'll see up here, we've just kind of got your typical carpet. One of our big things that we really believe is that we want to go with vinyl or hardwood everywhere. Typically vinyl is going to be the best bet. Different things like pests, bed bugs don't do very well on vinyl versus carpet and things like that. So you can come back here and see we've actually got some decent sized rooms here. Now, one thing that we did take a look at, and it's something that we'll continue to monitor, is we've actually got some relatively big cracks here. So typically when we see cracks, that may be a sign of structural problems. Now we checked it out from the outside. We didn't see anything major. They're not that large. It's a relatively new property. I didn't see anything down in the basement and we could really see it all. Also, I'm not worried about that with this property. One of the other things that we always look at is what type of windows do they have. So again, these were in the 80s. So these are likely original windows, but they're vinyl, they're not wood, they don't have lead paint on them, anything like that. So this is gonna be a much better starting point than other properties that have old wood windows that you absolutely have to replace. So this one, we're likely gonna have a couple repairs done to them, but I would factor that in somewhere $30 to $50 per window. For just a repair to make sure that it opens, closes, stays open, and locks. So that's our first bedroom. This other one would probably be your smallest bedroom. Again, you've got a closet here, totally legal bedroom. It was just not correctly qualified on the MLS as a 3-bedroom, which is really cool. We do have a broken pane here, so that's something that we'll get taken care of as we go through the process. So now, so you saw the 2 small bedrooms. Let's take a look at the bathroom and then up in the front bedroom, which is the biggest bedroom. So this is actually a pretty big bathroom here. Let's see if we can get some lights going. So the bathroom itself absolutely needs updating, but this is enough space right here that you could do a double bowl vanity. So I think that's actually what we'll be doing. We might even save the cabinet itself and just have granite that goes on top of it, especially if we're doing granite downstairs. It makes sense to just go ahead and grab a thing of granite and put 2 bowls in it and things like that. We look at the shower, we'll probably end up going back and tiling, replacing the toilet, kind of your typical stuff. And we'll do flooring the same as what we do out here, a waterproof vinyl. It's really important that you use waterproof and not water resistant. Waterproof means that even if water sits on it, when you go to wipe it up, it's not going to have any damage to the flooring itself. Whereas water resistant is actually, it's resistant to water. So if water sits there, it's actually going to start to cause damage. But if you just splash water on it and clean it up quickly, you're not going to have any problems. This being a bathroom and really just knowing people's propensity to spill stuff and not necessarily clean it up right away, then we're going to want to put that waterproof vinyl. It's well worth the extra $1 a square foot or whatever it ends up being. So now this would end up being your nice big bedroom, typically probably for the parents of the rentals here. And one thing you'll notice is there's a bunch of tape and things like that around this window. Likely what happens is this is right near the front of the house. And so there's probably lots of noise that comes in from just people driving down the street and things like that. So I actually recommended my client get a new one of these, make it a high quality one. Even just kind of standing here, we can hear the cars as they go by on the adjacent road right here. This gives us a good chance to kind of look out though and see across. So if we look directly across from us right now, I see four boarded up properties. The one directly across looks like it's got some new electrical hanging out of the wall. Looks like it's got new windows in there. So that's probably being renovated right now, which is a good sign. But typically when we would see 4 vacants like that, we would think, hey, this is an area where, there's not a lot of people that are desiring to come. The comps don't make sense to renovate the property and, be able to actually sell it to a homeowner or keep it as a rental. But again, as I mentioned before, because those houses were built in the early 1900s and this house was built in the 1980s, there's a really big discrepancy in what people pay for this house and what people pay for those houses right there. So what does this mean for investing in a property where you're across from some vacants or you're in an area with lots of vacants? In order to answer that question, we have to talk about why do people not like to invest in areas with vacants? The first answer or the first real question is, will the property rent? Any investment, that's going to be your biggest question. And so in an area with lots of vacants, it might be harder to rent. You just kind of have an ugly area where people get there and they say, hey, I'm not renting here. Let's get out of here. So in order to mitigate that, we always ask our tenant placement people, or we'll take a look at the other properties that have rented nearby. And our conversations with our tenant placement people were, hey, people actually love these houses that were built newer than the older stuff, especially when they're updated and stuff. They actually don't mind being across from vacants. So that's number 1 right there. Number 2 is our values usually aren't as good when we're nearby vacant properties. So again, we have to kind of look at and find properties that are across the street or on the same block as vacants when we're pulling our comparison properties. We did that here and we haven't talked about any numbers yet. We'll talk about that in a bit. But just to give you kind of a little teaser, the values aren't affected too much in this area. Then we talk about the third one. And the third one is the area and the perception of the area when you end up having lots of vacants. Now, we haven't talked about this specific area and why it's a good investment area, But some of the reasons are it's really close to transit. In Baltimore, downtown, and specifically 83, which is a highway that very quickly gets you out of the city, is really close by. It's one of the quickest areas to get out of the city. So that's one of the big things that we like about this area. And then also the neighborhood in general. So you see out the front, but out the back where we started, you've got nice green space, you've got good neighbors, things like that. And that's a really big plus if you are investing in this neighborhood. So those are some of the reasons why this actually makes sense. Now, it wouldn't always make sense. It always comes down to the numbers. So let me talk a little bit about numbers for you. So this house we have under contract for $67,000. So that gives you an idea of kind of the price point that we're looking at. Rental in this area would likely be about $1,200 a month. And judging by what we've seen, our budget is somewhere between $10,000 to $15,000 to get everything that we talked about done. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So we're looking at an all-in price right around $80,000. And by the way, this should be worth $110,000 to $120,000 once it's done. So we're all in for $80,000. It's worth $110,000 to $120,000. So we'll be able to get a new loan for it and get our money back from it. And then the rent is going to be around $1,200 a month for this. So those are kind of some of the things that really tell you that this one's a winner. It's a good investment. And the reason we can keep our construction prices so low is because, as we talked about earlier in the basement, our plumbing is very, very good. Our electrical is really good except for that panel, and our HVAC's in great shape. So that really keeps a lot of the big costs that typically run your construction costs on a project out of the picture. And we're really just talking about flooring, paint, some windows, and just really small stuff here. So if you're looking for any information on investing or even buying or selling your own personal residence, maybe even how to make that into a good investment, feel free to contact me at bluekeyteam.com. You can also shoot me an email at acarroll@kw.com. That's acarroll@kw.com, 2 R's and 2 L's in Carroll. That's all I got for you guys today. We're gonna do some other videos. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. We do walkthroughs like this all the time. We're gonna talk through some other investments. We're gonna talk through strategies. We might even talk about some current events. Thanks.